Hello, my name is Tom Brown. This is GreenTV. Bill Stant is running for state office in Indiana. Bill Stant is 48 years old. He lives with his family near Nashville, Indiana in the Yellowwood State Park. Bill earns a living as a financial planner. He married in 1980 and has 2 children. Bill is a member of the Indiana Green Party and the Brown County Greens. He hopes to be the Green Party candidate for Indiana Secretary of State. Bill has lots of experience as a political science teacher, activist, and organizer. He was invited by the Political Science Club to speak at Indiana University South Bend. The talk was co-sponsored by the American Democracy Project. GreenTV shows are 1.5 hour long. We edited Bill's speech to fit our format and hope to broadcast a second show featuring the audience question and answer period. In his speech, Bill Stant answers the following questions. What draws him to run for public office? Why is he seeking the Indiana Green Party nomination as its candidate for Secretary of State? What will be a successful third-party campaign for Secretary of State? Why does Indiana need election reform? Please give your attention to Bill Stant for just 1.5 hour. If you are registered to vote in Indiana, please sign his ballot access petition. Please support the Green Party and Green Values. Now, Bill Stant at IUSB.
Big general level reason why I'm running, there has been a rightward, for lack of a better word, drift in American politics for some time. It seems to have been launched in a backlash against the progress made by social movements such as the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, the labor movement. There has been a backlash. Right, left, conservative, liberal, these terms I regard as somewhat outdated, but for lack of a better term, those are the terminologies, the categories they're trying to keep us trapped in. And I think somebody's going to draw the line somewhere. And I see the Green Party as a way to draw the line and say, no, we're not walking down that road any further. Another reason I'm running is that society is becoming more and more extremely polarized. And we're seeing the liberals come up with their own attack talk shows, finger-pointing, name-calling, across the divide between the so-called liberals and the so-called conservatives. And there seems to be less and less good faith dialogue where the two sides have the courage of their convictions and on that basis extend to one another the benefit of the doubt and start talking. Why do you believe a woman should not have a right to terminate a pregnancy? Maybe I can learn if I just sit and listen and open my mind, but then will you sit and listen to me and let me explain to you why I do not think abortion is the issue. I think equality is the issue. I think the oppression of women is the issue. And just have a good faith dialogue. I see the Green Party as a vehicle through which we can have a good faith dialogue. A society that polarizes further and further and that doesn't engage in dialogue on fundamental issues that divide it. Another reason, I've already alluded to this, I think the old categories in which we have to think about politics are outmoded, old, and the ideologies are, to the extent that they ever reflected reality at all, are hardening. Liberalism versus conservatism. The Democrats versus the Republicans. The same old discussions over and over again. The same old shouting matches on talk television. It seems as though we've exhausted the potential for solving our problems as a society by mining those two categories of thinking and ideas. And it may well be, I think that we're going to discover that reality is moving forward, material human progress is going on, and the longer we remain stuck in these old ways of thinking and acting, the more dangerous our situation will be politically, and the less effective we will be politically. I'm running for office because of the decline of American political parties. I think, especially in the case of the Democratic Party, dollars have replaced voters. There is really no longer a mass base for the Democratic Party. There is certainly a mass, in quotation marks, base for the Republican Party in fundamentalist Christian congregations. And I think the Green Party should distinguish itself from the Democratic Party, especially the progressives in the Democratic Party, by respecting people who have the courage of their convictions. Parties have gotten weaker, and especially the Democratic Party. Its coalition is so broad, so diffuse, that it cannot take a stand on principle, any principle. So it has capitulated to the agenda that Bush represents on the Patriot Act. It has capitulated to the agenda that Bush represents on a militaristic foreign policy. It has capitulated, and it continues to capitulate. If they had any spine at all, as an opposing party, they would walk out and shut down the budget-making process and begin to mobilize the population to oppose what Bush represents. But they don't have the spine to do that. I like to say about the Democratic Party at the national level as an opposition party, as a party that enjoys a monopoly on the electoral opposition to Bush and who he represents, that if they didn't exist, the Republicans would have to have invented them. It's gotten to the point where we have to think in terms of making a very clear distinction between who we are as Greens, as voters, as progressives, as citizens in a democracy, and the Democrats. Because I think they're weak, I think they're vulnerable, and I think they're fading. And they're clamoring to hold on to what little they can by pandering, which is what they're very good at, almost as good as the Republicans. With weak parties, the parties cannot provide their traditional role. In American politics, and for those of you who are students of political science, if you've studied the work of Walter Dean Burnham, he coined the notion surrogate for revolution. The American political party system offers our politics a surrogate for revolution. And so we go through a periodic electoral realignment. When the Democrats took over from the Republicans as a majority party, clearly in the early 30s. And before that, when the Republicans took over from the Democrats. Those were realignments. There was a realignment that took place right before the Civil War when the Whigs were replaced by the Republicans. Interestingly, the same two parties, albeit quite different now than they were right before the Civil War, but the same two parties are the two parties that we've had since before the Civil War. I mean, that's antique. Anyway, because the mass base of voters and their loyalties to the parties have weakened, the party in the electorate, in the mind of the voter, in the willingness of the voter to use the party as an institution, as a handle of accountability to hold government, elected people accountable, they've weakened, and so voters don't use the parties like that anymore. They shoot themselves in the foot by saying, I vote for the candidate, not the party. Well, and how can you blame them? Because it's harder and harder to tell what the parties stand for. And without a clearly identifiable majority of registered voters for one party, minority for the other party, it's hard to see where the old surrogacy for revolution can work. I like to think of the Green Party as a party that is going to go well beyond the traditional role of third parties. In the textbooks that they use to teach Introduction to American Politics, they offer maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs, if you're lucky a page or 2 on third parties. And they're very patronizing about these third and minor parties. Very nice little third party. Thank you. You know, that's a real good idea. We're going to take that idea into our negotiations for the platform. Thanks. See you next election cycle. Bye. You know, it's just, that's not good enough. We're not building the Green Party just to offer a few ideas to the Democrats. If that's all we're doing, then we suffer from illusions. So I want to take the Green Party well beyond that limited role. A couple of more reasons generally why I'm running. There is ecological urgency on a global scale. It isn't just scare tactics. The scientific consensus is in, the evidence is clear. The atmosphere is warming, the ice caps are melting, the levels of the ocean are rising. Now, are we going to wait around till Hoosiers are providing hospitality to refugees from Long Island because they got flooded out of their homes? Who's going to come in and say, look, we have to address the way we organize our economy, the way we organize transportation. We have to start rubbing shoulders on public transportation. God forbid you might have to spend some time in civil space, in a public space with your fellow citizens. We have to think differently and act differently. And I don't think any of the other two parties are willing to take the urgency of the world environmental crisis into the election process. There are too many very wealthy, very entrenched interests that will talk the talk about sustainability and environmental protection, but are funding candidates who are going to slow down progress in that direction. Finally, my last general reason is that we have an unprecedented opportunity politically. Capital, if you will, the the people who are standing and pulling the levers, if you will, at the commanding heights of the global corporate economy, they are divided amongst themselves. They're always somewhat divided. They like to provide a united front, but it's pretty clear that they're divided. When the big oil companies are at each other's throats over issues of sustainability, then you know that key strategic sectors at the commanding heights of the economy are opposed to one another. And when the elites are split and fighting, it's an opportunity for the people at bottom to get organized and take advantage of the situation. I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for the Democrats to do that. More specifically, why am I running for office in Indiana for the Indiana Green Party for Secretary of State? Well, the fact is we have to have 30,000 verified registered voter signatures, segregated on these sheets by county. One sheet for Bartholomew County, another sheet for Marion County. There's like 94 counties in this state. And the grand total by the end of June next year of the signatures, name, address, and date of birth that are accepted by the various county clerks has to be 30,000. 30,000. Now that, a few weeks ago I ran the numbers in my head. I said, okay, how many signatures per week is that on average? Well, if we're going to have 15 or 20,000 extra signatures for them to throw out, because they'll be looking for reasons to throw them out, that means we need 50,000 signatures. And that means we needed, a few weeks ago, between 800 and 900 signatures a week on average statewide. We shouldn't have such a chore to get on the ballot. However, that's what we have to do. And if we can't get 30,000 signatures between now and the end of June, it used to be later than that. I believe it was Memorial Day, and they made it harder by pushing the deadline for those signatures up to the end of June. In much the same spirit that they're making it harder for people to vote by forcing them to produce or suggesting that they should produce a government-issued photo ID at the polling place. You should be able to vote at any polling place. You should be able to register the day of the election. And if you wish, you should be able to log on and vote from your computer at home. But they don't want to make it that easy. The presupposition is that you, as an American voter, left to your own devices, are going to commit election fraud if you even have a chance. And so you have to register weeks in advance. You have to produce an ID when you get there. You have to stop and make sure your name's on a paper roll. What are they doing with these paper printouts at the polling places? It's insane. This is the 21st century. Anyway, we need to reform elections. We need ballot access. We need to do that here in Indiana. In other words, we need to do what my whole campaign slogan is: get serious about democracy. And in so doing, we need to revivify, reclaim the civil space, the public space. Civil society is the theoretical term for people in political science. We need to revive, first of all, establish a line of defense for civil society against privatization, against individualism, against the attacks that it has suffered, the presumption that if it's got to do with something collective at the government level, it is by definition inherently corrupt and inefficient. It drives me nuts when I hear people complain about government inefficiency. I'm an insurance agent and an investment representative, and I manage money for people. That's what I do for a living. Have you ever tried to get decent service out of an American corporation? The bigger they are, the worse. They make the government look like the very model of efficiency. And yet it's the defenders of corporate prerogative that are complaining about government as bureaucratic and inefficient. It's the pot calling the kettle black. Somebody needs to stand up and say something like that in the electoral process. And we need to demand their right to say it to people on the evening news in their tens of millions. So I want to revive civil society. I want people to understand that casting a vote for Bill Stant is making a commitment to show up at the next meeting. Because election day is just one day out of a 2-year cycle. You have to become a responsible citizen. If you want to be a Green, you got to think about what it really means to be a citizen in a democracy. It isn't some hermetically sealed sphere of personal private rights that you have to watch vigilantly to defend. Yes, you do have to do that, but it's more an outward, other-oriented ethic. You have to engage people. You have to not be afraid of your fellow citizen on the street. You have to extend to people the benefit of the doubt that they'd rather help you than hurt you. We have to rise above the fear of the current political climate that's imposed upon us. And I want you to think in terms of making a personal commitment to do that if you vote Green. Get serious about democracy. We have to contain the influence of money, and once we've brought it into containment in the state of Indiana, we then have to reform the role of money in politics. We can start with a very simple campaign finance reform. Any private money that goes into a campaign treasury and any private money that goes into a party's treasury is divided in half. 50% of it goes to the campaign or the party. The other 50% is equally divided amongst all the other candidates for that office or all the other parties, period. You want to give money to a candidate? There's a string attached. You have to support the whole process. You can't just support that one candidate. As a responsible citizen in a democracy, you want to know what the opponents are saying against the positions that the candidate you're leaning towards and what they say about themselves. And you can help them because we're going to make you give 50% of your contribution to all the others. How hard could it be? We also need to require disclosure. If we're going to identify multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns as a feature of, as fundamental to freedom of speech, then we have to know, okay, who paid? Where did the money come from? Exactly who are the Swift Vote veterans? And exactly who funded them? And if they're not willing to publicize this on a readily accessible database on the internet and through mailings to American households, then they shouldn't be allowed to operate. It's one thing to give people freedom of speech, but it's another to give people both the power to deceive. Freedom of speech is also a collective thing. You have a right to know who's saying what they're saying to you. Otherwise, they're just slandering, or their potential is just slandering. So there must be disclosure. Any and all lobbying activities, as well as contributions to election campaigns, must be publicized. Easy enough to do it on a centralized database on the web, and the Secretary of State should be required to send every household address in the state of Indiana a printout of who gave who how much money. The Secretary of State is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the elections in the state of Indiana, maintaining the voting rights of Hoosiers. And so I think the Secretary of State needs to think about reform in a big way. And I don't see either of the two parties who occupied the office with one of their partisan candidates talking about serious and thoroughgoing election reform that would enhance democracy rather than further restrict it. All they're really doing is playing upon the climate of fear and making it harder to vote, harder to get on the ballot. Another fundamental responsibility of the Secretary of State is the chartering of corporations. If you want to form a corporation in the state of Indiana, you register that corporation in the Secretary of State's office. Your corporation is allowed to operate as a corporation in the state of Indiana at the pleasure of the state of Indiana. The Secretary of State is named as an officer of the state government in the Constitution. I think there's only 4 there. It's Attorney General, Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor. So why aren't we telling businesses, you can operate under this charter, but you do so at our pleasure. We have the power to revoke it. And if we have the power to revoke that charter, why don't we use that power? There should be language of corporate social responsibility required of corporations that want to charter a corporation in the state of Indiana. And that language should make reference to all the other stakeholders. Now, we all know that there's one stakeholder that we elevate to a quasi-divine status, put on a pedestal and bow down before us. It's those who claim as their own private property hundreds of millions of shares of corporate stock in America. Okay? Well, you know what? I think workers whose family's welfare depends upon their tenure of employment at that corporation and its operations in your community, I think they have a stake too. And I think their stake in what goes on at that corporation ought to be elevated to a level equal to the status of the private property owners who claim control over the corporation because they happen to own its stock. Interestingly, that might seem real radical, but when you stop and look at who owns 50–60% of corporate America today, it is people who are called the beneficial owners of pension funds. Corporate pension funds, state government pension funds, private university pension funds, religious institution pension funds, public university pension funds, the public employees retirement system, the Indiana State Teachers Retirement System. I mean, we could stand here and list these for the next hour. The amount of common stock of corporate America that they own has been climbing significantly. So the same people that work at the corporations are actually, believe it or not, quite a few of them are actually partial owners of the corporations. But they own shares in a mutual fund and a 401k plan, or they own a few shares in a stock purchase plan. their interests as workers need to be elevated to a level equivalent to the interests of the people that own the common voting shares of stock. There are other stakeholders, the people that live in the community whose lives are going to be disrupted if that corporation ups and ships those jobs to Mexico. Those stakeholders need to be represented. If a corporation is going to be recognized in a court of law as an individual equal to you or me, and we're just going to ignore the fact that a corporation has a platoon of high-paid lawyers who are going to research the case between you and that corporation up one side and down the other and come in and stand before the judge as an equal? Well, I'm sorry, that equality before the government is a nice ideological fiction, but you know, I haven't got the money to hire a platoon of lawyers. I feel this corporation has damaged me. You know, if we're going to pit me against a corporation in a court of law, in a civil suit, as if we're equal, then there are other measures that we can take to elevate the influence, the power of employers, of employees, of communities in which companies operate, of companies that supply those corporations, of people that buy their products, upstream, downstream. And I think that language recognizing those stakeholders should be in the corporate charters that companies file with the Secretary of State. It's a fundamental issue of political equality. It's the same way money undermines your rights as a voter. One person, one vote, but unlike a narrow economic elite, you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to put a commercial on primetime TV about your point of view on this or that issue. Well, you know, you don't have the power to influence that election anywhere near like the person that can do that. So money undermines the principle of one person, one vote. Well, equality before the court of law, your rights as a citizen in front of a jury, in front of a judge, are undermined, again, by the power of money. And so all I'm suggesting is, this isn't anything dangerously radical, I'm suggesting political equality, simple political equality. Okay. The Secretary of State is a very important person in Indiana and in other states, most notoriously Florida in 2000 and Ohio in 2004. Why is this office a partisan office? Why is it a Democrat or a Republican holding this office? The credibility of the whole electoral process, the integrity, is subject to question. Tens of millions of voters today think the whole system is rigged. And the same, in Indiana, the Secretary of State is the person that enforces campaign finance law. Now, I went to a website before I came here this afternoon. I played hooky from the conference over at the Marriott and went to this website, followthemoney.org, okay? And I entered Indiana, 2002, finance, insurance, and financial services, Todd Rokita. Hit go. $33,960 came up under finance, insurance, and financial services. $18,100 came up under banks. $350,473 came up under commercial banks. And that's evidently money that was contributed to Todd Rokita's campaign for Secretary of State in 2002. Now, this is the man who's in charge of enforcing impartially campaign finance laws. The reason I chose finance insurance is because I was interested in looking at how much money flows into races, and most importantly the Secretary of State's race, from the investment business and the insurance business, because the Secretary of State oversees the Office of Securities Regulation in the state of Indiana. The Secretary of State is in charge of making sure that I, as a stockbroker, that I, literally me, as an investment advisor, am following the rules and regulations. And I wanted to see, well, how much money has passed between candidates on the one hand and the financial services business and investment reps on the other into elections? Why is this person who's supposed to enforce investment regulations that protects the investing public and campaign finance law receiving money from these private interests? I mean, does anyone smell a rat? I don't have any evidence whatsoever against Todd Rokita, and I'm sure it's perfectly legal that he accepted this money in his campaign. Well, how else was he supposed to run as a Democrat unless he got money? You don't run as a Democrat unless you can get money for a state level office. So what I am saying is that given the amount of suspicion that people have leveled towards the integrity of the whole system and the number in their millions of people who have given up on the election system, that we have to elevate this office to a level that is somewhat closer to being beyond suspicion. So the Secretary of State's race should be strictly nonpartisan. Not funded by the Democrats, not funded by the Republicans, not funded by private money, period, full stop, none. The qualifications for office are the reputation of the individual for integrity, what they've accomplished in their life, what their degrees are, you know, what is it about this person, totally aside from partisan politics, that qualifies him or her for the office? And we can publicly fund the campaign. How hard can it be? It's the less political will we have, the harder it will be. And I think the Green Party can muster the political will with your help. So I think not only should the Secretary of State be nonpartisan, but the office that regulates the investment business in this state should be moved out of the Secretary of State's jurisdiction and put under the Attorney General, where you have a lawyer who knows how to take people to court for breaking the law and you know, take a page from Eliot Spitzer in New York. The investing public in New York is a lot better off than you or I here in Indiana. As investors, I can tell you that. I wonder sometimes if the office that regulates investments in this state could regulate its way out of the box. They've never visited my office. I don't know who they are. I wouldn't know how to find them if I had to call them up. Nobody even knows they're there. Occasionally, they capture somebody trying to rip off little old ladies through telemarketing fraud. And then they trumpet that, you know, we're doing our job for you. But when one of my clients commits suicide after being victimized by predatory lending by a huge multinational bank, I don't hear anything out of them about the numbers of poor Hoosiers who are losing their homes, their only assets, to predatory lending in this state because the regulators aren't paying any attention. What is a successful campaign for Secretary of State? You have to run a race like you want to win. And ideally, you can win, you know. Now, I don't have any illusions. The Green Party in the state of Indiana is very small. We're struggling to build, recruit, get people involved. We don't have any money. Well, I'm the treasurer. We have a little bit, but for all practical purposes, we don't have any money. Our chances of actually winning this race in 2006 are pretty slim. But there is another way to define success in 2006. 2% of the vote or better. 2% of the vote gets the Green Party on the ballot, dog catcher to president, in 2008. There's just a lot about Indiana that people just overlook, and they just think we're all a bunch of hayseeds. And we need to prove them wrong. And if we put the Green Party on the ballot, we will have done that.